So a lot of people want to work in the AI field, but they don't have a degree in AI or machine learning. And there is this misconception that in order to become an AI agent developer, you need a ton of degrees.
So for context, in university, I actually studied philosophy as my undergraduate degree. I don't have an AI background at all, but I was able to build an entire career and even a company around machine learning and AI models. Truth of the matter is that it's one of the best fields to break into. So the best thing to do is finding projects that really push your limits of your knowledge. Now, the problem is if you're trying to read the documentation, you're not going to get anywhere. Reading courses, reading books, reading textbooks, this will not get you anywhere. The best teacher here is going to be experience.
I couldn't agree more. Now, I want to ask, what was like your AI awakening? Like, when did you realize that AI is going to change the world and that you want to be in the industry? And what were the first steps that you took?
When I was actually studying an undergrad, so I studied philosophy and economics as my majors. And there was one professor who just really inspired me and pushed me to kind of like take things that were definitely in the challenge zone, some things that were out of my comfort zone. And there was this one really interesting class that just appealed to me just by the name alone called data mining. And I had no idea what that meant. And what I had realized though is this class entirely was a machine learning class.
So you almost fell into the machine learning AI space by accident.
It was entirely by accident, but the way I say it is that it's proactive serendipity. You take bets that you don't know if they're going to work out, but sometimes these are like huge wins in ways that you can never have predicted. Do you want to stay comfortable with where you're at, where you have expected return, or do you want to venture to something that might be more painful, but might have huge returns?
For people who are not convinced, what makes AI a great field?
AI is a fantastic field to work in. There is more and more data being collected than ever before in human history. There's all sorts of novel applications waiting to be found. And you have this creative tool set that's almost lets you build anything. It's like a Lego box. You can just build anything with it.
And obviously on top of that, it's one of the fastest growing fields, salaries are very nice. So like there are so many different reasons why people should consider working in the AI space. By the way, if you don't want to miss the AI revolution, make sure to join my community. Inside, you'll get direct access to myself. And if you join during June, I will build a custom GPT just for you. Yes, every person that joins before the end of June will get their own custom GPT built for them. So if that sounds interesting to you, make sure to join. It's the first link in the description. But as you said, like sometimes you can either wait and maybe you're in a profession that will not even exist in 5 years. There's a lot of those. Or you can take the small amount of discomfort today, start learning about it, accept that you might need to pivot and upskill yourself and change careers. Or you do nothing, and in 5-10 years when your job gets replaced, you'll experience a tremendous amount of pain because you'll get fired.
I will say this, I think getting into the AI field, not a little bit of discomfort, it's actually probably a lot of discomfort. So you have to also consider that there's going to be a big learning curve to really upping your skills. So you have to learn programming, you have to learn a lot of kind of mathematical concepts, like a lot of calculus, a fair amount of linear algebra, and just a lot of statistics to really ramp yourself up. And honestly, I think this could take a very long time to kind of get a high level view of how to really master and apply these concepts to novel problems. But that said, as exactly what you're saying is, do you want to be the person whose fate is being controlled by the industry? Or do you want to be the person who, in a way, shapes what the world becomes? Because you're going to be a leader in that sense. And even if you are automating a job, what you're really doing is you're not automating it, you're making it more efficient. You're making it so that things that were previously boring are faster or good.
Yeah, Sam Altman said this on Lex Friedman. Think about like automating the tasks, not the jobs, right? So like, every job has some tasks that are easily automatable. So it won't be like somebody decided to automate researchers, somebody decided to automate copywriters. It's just that the task of copywriting is now automated.
I think that the way you should be thinking about it is, it's like, imagine asking somebody to do research before Google. You would have to go to the library and talk to the librarian and open the books and search through the books. This is the kind of stuff that we don't want to be doing, and it makes research less effective. Now, it's hard to say that like research has disappeared because of the existence of Google. It's the opposite. It's flourished. So by actually making things more efficient, paradoxically, you create a moment where it becomes more widespread and more in demand. This is what we've seen in programming also, which is even though we have seen way more tools to make development easier, and we've seen way more developers in the industry, and it seems crowded. The demand for computer science, and the demand for code, and the demand for AI has actually increased dramatically because of how much better it's gotten. So this is one thing that a lot of people fail to grapple with, which is the industry is only expanding. It's not getting smaller, and even though a lot of people are flooding in, there's going to be plenty of opportunities to go around. In fact, I'd say the opportunities will become more valuable, so it's better to get in early.
Yeah, and just to touch on that, like people don't realize just how early we all are, right? Because like I always use this analogy, but like ChatGPT is like roughly 100 million weekly active users, which compared to the world population, that's like, you know, what, 1.2% of the world. So literally like 99% of people are not even using ChatGPT. And then probably less than 1% of people who have created a ChatGPT account are even thinking about AI agents, right? So it's like 1% of 1%. It's like, we are all super early. Obviously, we could have been earlier. People watching this, I'm not talking about you specifically, Alex, but people need to realize that we're all super early. And as you said, like, it's much better to get in now than to get in late. Like everybody would wish that, you know, they jumped on the internet revolution in the early 1990s or in the social media revolution in the, you know, 2000 late 2000s. So it's like people always, in retrospect, they wish, but when it's happening, it's you know, you have to see it and you have to believe in the future. What I want to ask is like a lot of people in AI, they use this argument, oh, but AI is different, right? So like when you bring up this, like there'll be more opportunity to say, oh, but this is somehow fundamentally different technology. Like it, for some reason, it will not create jobs. It will just only destroy. Like, what do you have to say to those arguments?
So I think there's like a lot of angles that people take that they really say that AI will automate things at such a fast rate and such an effective way that it will just make people, it will obviate the need for people, which I think could not be further from the truth. I think what ends up happening is that the things that we want to focus on and the things that actually matter towards problem solving, which is coming up with problem statements, acquiring the right data, finding ways to stop blockers, and you know, a lot of like people politics, you know, finding customers, making sales. Those are things that we're going to start focusing a lot more on. Because right now, we're think about it like right now we're programming with hammers and chisels, which is like, you know, the original writers, they were using hammers and chisels to write things out. Right now, you can think of VS Code or even a lot of these tools we use now, like Vim, it's hammers and chisels. If we can just like, you know, create the new typewriter, this AI moment is like the Gutenberg moment. It's like there will be two moments in history where we look back and say, wow, this really changed human interaction with technology. And that was the printing press, and this is going to be AI, which is you can just, with a high level description of things, explain how you want a problem solved, and it will just solve the problem for you. And what we're going to be focusing more on is not the manner at which we solve the problems. It's going to be the thoughtfulness that we do into instructing them. So with the printing press, nobody really cares about what the letters are. They care about what the meaning behind the words are. So in the same way, we need to be thinking about what is the meaning behind the instructions we send to our agents, and how will those shape what we want to have.
Dude, so much to unpack there. One thing I want to kind of touch on is that you said like programming with chisels, right? That it's kind of similar to my idea of like we live in the Stone Age. Basically, like people always think that, oh, we're the most advanced, right? Like they look 100 years back and just laugh at how primitive and, you know, lack of technology people were. But like now we're the same, you know, for the future. So like all the clothes we're wearing, like there is no new technology in terms of clothing, right? So like, for example, I want to like taking every day, putting on socks takes so much time. I just want to stand on some pad that automatically wraps some new material around my feet. And like in 1.5 seconds, whatever, I have like some super futuristic socks. Like there's so much stuff, right? Or even like thoughts, typing is so slow. Like this is why Elon is pushing to Neuralink so much. Speaking and typing is like, compared to the speed of thought, it's just insanely slow. So there's so many of these things where, as you said, like we will be looking back, it's like, how did they even pull this off? It's like, my fear is that we basically live in the Stone Age, and like technology, AI, computers are like the only real, you know, promise of the future. It's like the only advanced thing we have basically, and we kind of need AI to unlock everything. Another example is that nobody knows anything about their health. Like how many people go, get personalized tests of their, blood, all the different metrics, all the different organs, like, measuring every organ in the body. Nobody knows anything about the health, and all the fixes, all the cures are generalized, which is a terrible approach compared to individualized, solutions. So like there's so many things that are so obviously primitive, but for some reason there is this human arrogance that we're like advanced, right?
I think it's very easy to take abundance for granted. So I think like the socks analogy is really clever because like there's different like phases of this cultural artifact of clothes. For most of human history, clothes were very, very expensive. It was to the point that in Middle Age Europe, when people died, they had to have laws and armed guards preventing grave robbers, because what the grave robbers would do was they would steal the clothes from the bodies.
Wow.
Clothes were that valuable and expensive. And we live in an era where right now clothes are in high abundance. You can get t-shirts, from the bargain bin for, less than $1. And obviously, we take this for granted. Like, oh, we didn't really think that we were that poor in the past. Right now, in most of the world, nobody is starving for food. There's parts of the world where this is a big issue, but I think that optimistically, this won't be an issue anymore. It won't be even like it won't be people starving for food. It will be people wanting for, variety, like, oh, I want a Michelin star dinner, or I want sushi or something like this. So as kind of technology is advancing, we start to take things for granted. And it really strikes me as the case that right now, like probably 20 years or 30 years down the line, they're going to look back and not even think about programming, or they're not even going to think about doing a lot of processes in the same way we do currently now. It's going to be like, they're going to think to us like, wow, how did they even live like this? They were using punch cards. They just like, it made no sense, this technology they were using. So it's really kind of like, it's helpful to look back at the past as like a benchmark of how people really used to like live around their technology and just not be aware of like how far they'd come.
Yeah, and another useful frame that you can learn from the past is the reaction of the public to every new technology, right? So when Henry Ford invented cars, it was like newspapers printed that, oh, obviously everybody will want a horse carriage. Like why would you want a horseless carriage? It takes like to refuel, it breaks down, like horses are reliable. So like we see the same with AI. So many people are hating on it. And the example you brought with like reducing poverty, right? There's so much data on this. Like literally the data could not be clearer. Like over the last 100, 200 years, how the absolute poverty is declining to near zero. I think it's like 8%, like the extreme poverty or something. And technology is a big part of why this is possible. Yet there are so many people that still are like anti-technology and want to decelerate and want to go back. It's like, why do you think those people have that argument? Like, do they not see the obvious charts?
If I were to steelman it, it's that, and I also don't believe this opinion, but I'll try my best to defend it. It's that the gains, globally speaking, don't spread out evenly. So it's not necessarily the case that if the economy grows, that the people who are the least well off, the poorest people, will benefit. It might just be the rich people who benefit, and the poor people don't benefit. But I think just historically speaking, that's not true. It's just kind of crazy to think that like in the past probably 10 years, cell phones have become pervasive. Like everyone has these things. And originally when they came out, they were quite expensive and they were a luxury. For a long time, people had car phones, and then you had very expensive cell phones. And now you can get them for like, less than $50 and sometimes even cheaper than that. And anyone with a cell phone you have like a very, very powerful computer in there that can connect to the internet. You can program on a lot of these things too, surprisingly. You can do business through WhatsApp, and you can really connect to the entire world. And you see people in the poorest nations right now. You even see people in the Amazon rainforest who have access to WhatsApp. And they're able to connect to the internet through Starlink and things like this. So thinking about like technology, by and large, democratizes itself. It starts off as very expensive and very inaccessible. And then over time, it becomes highly accessible to the people who have the least access to it. And that's also probably the way to think about this AI movement, which right now it's highly inaccessible, unfortunately. Um, you have to know a lot about, how to prompt. You have to have an access to the internet. You have to actually have access to a credit card to pay for ChatGPT. But it could very quickly change such that we have people who are GPU rich, right? We live in the GPU rich world, most of us. And then eventually the hardware itself is going to become cheaper. It's going to be more accessible, and people are going to be able to try these things out for themselves. And they're going to find novel and clever ways to share knowledge and build networks on top of this. And I think this is going to actually this might happen a lot faster than the hardware moment, which is cell phones, because already everybody has the cell phones now. But you can run large language models either in the cloud, but you can also run it locally. We have people running Llama and LM Studio on their phone, or on their lousy laptops.
Yeah.
And soon that's going to happen on the phones. Google's announcing that you're going to be able to run it in Google Chrome. So we're going to enter this era where not just the hardware being democratized, but even the AI is being democratized in a way everyone gets access to it.
So I couldn't agree more. It's much easier to ship a software update than to deliver a new piece of hardware to 8 billion people. So you mentioned that it's going to happen much faster, which brings the question of like timelines. Like, what are your timelines in terms of AGI, superintelligence? Like, are you one of those people that's going to be like AGI is in 2 years and then superintelligence is going to be just in months away, or are you more like Jan LeCun's side? It's going to be slower.
I think that it's hard for me to make estimates here. I will say this: the folks that I know who are building at companies like Anthropic and OpenAI and Mistral, there's a lot of mixed opinions about what AGI is and how it will arrive and what it means. And there's a lot of disagreements. So number one is that the things that are necessary for AGI are fundamentally out of distribution. So for example, AGI might mean we find a cure for cancer, but the data needed to create a cure for cancer might be out of distribution of every piece of data humans have ever collected. It might be something totally new. And there's, I think, a high likelihood that we won't arrive at that data for a very long time, unfortunately. So these kinds of AGI moment things, I think it's going to be a lot harder to grapple with than what we currently have. I think we might arrive at a point where the algorithms and the hardware themselves are able to learn the distributions faster and more cheaply and solve problems in meaningful ways. But I think that a lot of the things that lead to us like having this AGI moment, and even like the fearsome ones, they're probably very, very far off. That's it. In between, what we're seeing a lot of people do is trying to build tools and the ability for agents to kind of actuate with the world. And I think that's where things become a lot more powerful. So you can kind of think of an AI agent as a large language model that's connected to tools. And what tools enable it to do is change and mutate the world state. So things outside of the internal neural network. It's like actually updating APIs, changing databases, maybe even controlling robots, maybe even hiring other humans to do things. And so these sorts of mechanisms are the ones that enable us to actually like have bridge the gap between like concept and reality. But I'm also concerned right now that it's just there's a big data set gap. And the internal reasoning capabilities, and this is where the big debate is, not everyone believes that these things are capable of internal reasoning to a capacity that lets it to be fully, life-changing autonomous.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the probably most important factor is the definition when talking about AGI timelines, because there's so many different definitions. Because like the simplest one is like an AI system that is smarter than the average human, right? And I think for that, it doesn't need to solve cancer, right? It doesn't need to do new science. Because like, let's be honest, the barrier to be more useful than the average human is not that high. But if you take it up a notch and be like, it needs to make new physics discoveries, it needs to cure diseases. Like, I think that is some like middle step between AGI and superintelligence. I don't know what to call it, but yeah, I mean, the definition is on like, is heavily. And do you believe in the fast takeoff or slow takeoff? Meaning, after we have something that can do novel science, novel AI research, do you think like it's going to be a few months and super intelligence is here, or do you think it will take years, maybe decades?
I think the bottleneck is always going to be the physical world and physical humans on this. So performing novel science and novel research requires basically lab subjects, clinical trials, creating things that actually, making robots that can do experiments. And truth of the matter is, these are very expensive and they're very slow. And even if you want to move something from one side of the country to the other, you have to go to the post office or you have to ship it in a package. So I think that there's just going to be this huge physical barrier that prevents that kind of takeoff in general. Humans are definitely going to be the limiting factor here, not the technology. So maybe that will be the mindset shift, which is AI is going to be taking off a lot faster than the people. And we're going to be the thing that makes it that we're going to be the reason it's going to be a slow takeoff. It won't be because of the technology.
Yeah, I agree. So you mentioned that you talk, to people working at Anthropic, OpenAI, stuff like that. What's kind of the vibe in San Francisco? Like, what's the feeling? What are the talking topics?
I would say that, but just in general in San Francisco, there's no better place in the world to work on the most ambitious projects of your life. And this applies to startup founders. It applies to researchers at large companies like this, and even applies to entrepreneurs at large corporations. Everyone's working on finding how do you apply this cutting edge research and how do you apply cutting edge technology and make it better and faster and more helpful. So the vibe from the researchers and in general is that you should never bet against the AI getting better. By and large, it's only going to get more effective. So for example, a lot of people are building companies around basically adding tools to make AI smarter or faster. But it's not fundamental to the transformers or the neural networks that power them. You should always bet on GPT-5 or GPT-6 or whatever. It's going to be a huge milestone of improvement on top of what's previously happening. So these little hacks, they're not going to be the ones that that make the big difference changes. It might be a temporary solution. It might be a market solution, but you shouldn't really expect them to be the long-standing ones. So a great example is chatting with PDFs. Everybody kind of loves this notion okay, to chat with a PDF, you have to do, first you have to load it into a document parser, and then you have to do maybe some OCR and a table extractor and so on and so forth. The way to kind of think about this is going to be a temporary fix for something that will be rolled out in a model or two. So eventually, it's going to be able to maybe even read the binary in the future instead of having to do all these weird document loader steps and these data processing steps. These little I would call them hacks in a way. These are probably going to go away in the future. And that's what you should be thinking about when you're betting for the model or against the model. If you're betting against the model, it means you're building hacks to make the models better. But you should always expect the models to get better themselves.
Yeah, this is probably the single best piece of advice that AI founders could receive, because so many of them are building stuff that GPT-5 will just destroy. And then they'll be the shocked fish is what happened? But yeah, they were betting against AI. They were essentially shorting OpenAI. They're basically betting that LLMs will stagnate and that their current solution somehow cannot be done, with a better language model, which is obviously a very risky bet, especially if you believe in the AI future.
I think that one use case for optimism, for example, is AI coding agents. So right now, a lot of these coding agents, they're not so great. They hallucinate a fair amount, and they're slow, and they're very expensive. And a lot of researchers and developers and founders, they go into the AI agent coding space, and they think that the model is not good enough, which is entirely true. And you have to build little hacks to make the models better and perform as expected. But you should bet on the fact that the models will get better. And then down the line, it might be only 50% effective now, but the next model might be 90% effective. You should only expect them to get better.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. By the way, on this topic, a lot of people in my school community have asked, because on the last video we did, you mentioned Augment, that you're using it. Is that public? Because a lot of people have asked, because you mentioned that you hooked me up, so people are like, oh yeah, I want Alex to hook me up as well. So first of all, why are you using Augment over the others, and how can others use it?
So I've actually tried a number of these Copilot style tools. So I've tried the original GitHub Copilot. I was one of the early beta testers when that came out. I fell in love with the tool. Then I also tried the Cursor Copilot, which is also quite good. There's a few others I've been interested in, which is Continue, which is an open source Copilot and it runs locally. You can set it to run up on kind of like Olama instances or offline LLM instances. And Augment is just it's kind of like the latest in my arsenal. Well, the reason I really like it is that it's super fast, and then it loads a lot of your code base into context. And so that way, it saves like a lot of clicks for me rather than having to copy paste things into ChatGPT or have to fight against hallucination. It really kind of knows exactly what I'm asking for. Right now, Augment is a beta. If you join our Discord, we can actually probably try to set you up with some licenses or some trials. But yeah, it's definitely kind of one of the more cutting edge tools, and they're basically fighting to be the number one copilot for code editors right now.
Yeah, I mean, if you could set up some license for my community, that would be amazing, obviously, because so many people were asking for it when you mentioned it.
I will definitely. We're pretty tight with the team at Augment. I can definitely try to help set some people up with some licenses.
Awesome. So another question actually from one of the viewers was that, will there be an option to use Agent Ops, which is your startup, without sharing the agent data with you?
Mm-hmm. So we've seen a lot of enterprises and companies who want to do two things. They want to do VPC, they want to do air gap. They want to make sure that the data never leaves their cloud or their system. And we've worked like very, very closely with that. One of the big challenges, and this is kind of like how we've been thinking about this in general, is like number one, setting up like a very, very tight privacy agreement so that we make sure that none of the data is ever leaking the system and it's only used to make sure that users are having the best experience possible and that privacy is totally maintained. So that's the number one way we've been setting things up. But we have set we've met a lot of customers who are trying to run things locally, keep it private. We've been able to work with offline hosting. So self-setup is something we've been able to set up before, and happy to chat with anyone who wants to do that.
Okay, amazing. So another question from the community members. What do you think will be the next major breakthrough in AI, and how does Agent Ops plan to be at that forefront of the next breakthrough?
I think the next major moments are definitely multimodal. So we've seen a glimpse of with these like music generators. We've seen it with just basically GPT Vision and now GPT 4o. They haven't shown the voice model yet, but I think that it's coming soon, and it's definitely going to change the way we do things. And the reason why I'm excited about this is that video and voice and images, these are all things that have natural use cases. But the extension of that is any arbitrary file type. There have been some really cool, interesting research papers on how do you turn bytecode into things that are recognizable by transformers. So how do you tokenize bytes? That could be very, very powerful. And I think that generally speaking, we're going to have like multimodal input in the truest sense of the word, like any kind of like file type, and be able to feed that to a model, and it's going to be able to work with that. The way that we're thinking about that with Agent Ops is like, instead of just being string tokens, I think we're going to be able to have a way of handling more modalities. Currently, we handle videos and images, but definitely audio is coming soon. Yeah. And I think other arbitrary types of files are going to come into the play soon, as soon as those kinds of models release. And I think that's going to be a huge moment once somebody figures out how to go beyond images and audio. It's going to like really, really fundamentally change the way that we interact with these LLMs. And we're definitely thinking about that right now at Agent Ops. Right now we really do focus on text, images, and videos, and other stuff's coming soon. I can't say how soon, but probably in at least a year or two.
Yeah, I mean, even if we go to the most fundamental level, which is input, most people type like super slow, like 40 words per minute, whatever, right? But they can speak much faster, maybe like 150, 200. That alone would be a huge unlock when you can just do something and then you just speak, and you're working with the OpenAI app, or somehow you're basically working with some voice agents, and you basically, instead of super slow typing, you can like 3 to 4x your productivity speed just by multimodality in the LLMs.
Yeah, thinking about like hacks again. So this is betting against OpenAI and Anthropic and all these other large players. Betting against them means believing that the only way to make a truly conversational AI is investing in transcription technology. So transcription technology is kind of like a hack, which is turning voice into text and then feeding that text to an LLM. What you should be expecting, though, is that the LLMs will just be able to receive voice all on their own.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a lot better and a lot more effective than the transcription step. So think about it like that, which is like what current gaps are between us and the model, and which ones are probably going to disappear.
Absolutely. So another question from the community members: how can people stay ahead of the curve? Because a lot of people have this fear of like they're going to learn something that will become obsolete in a year. How do people? Is there a way to prevent it? And how can people stay really ahead of the curve?
I think the number one skill you could have is learning how to assess the effectiveness of problems. So learning how to evaluate how good models are, and just evaluate, even on a personal level, like how good inputs and outputs are from, ChatGPT. We call it sometimes they generate like what they call in the industry slop. So it's just not good output. But how do you do that on a scientific level? How do you think scientifically about using these systems? I think a really fantastic book that really changed my perspective on things is called Elements of Statistical Learning. It's a really, really challenging book to read, but if you can master those concepts, understanding how to evaluate systems and models, I think that will prepare you for a world where there's a lot of uncertainty about how effective things are, but you have kind of like a way to discern what is good and what's not. So these kinds of skills will never go away. I think the algorithms are always going to be changing, and the problem sets and the data and the way that you load that will be changing, and the models, like everyone's always updating versions. Like even just before this podcast, Anthropic published a new model, and it's like a bit of a treadmill. But if you really focus on the core fundamentals of how do you think about assessing systems, and there's a lot of really great resources on this, and this is like the data scientist toolkit, understanding like really good data. This is how you're going to be able to stay afloat, because the models are always changing, the numbers are always changing, but the fundamentals will never change.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically learning the meta skills, right? So that is like a meta skill that supports other skills. And same way as like, ability to learn new concepts quickly is a meta skill, or like ability to focus intensely is a meta skill. Those are always going to be valuable no matter, whether you're using Windows, Mac OS, Cursor IDE, GitHub Copilot, Augment. That's almost like a detail. If you have like the meta skills of like, being able to work hard, being able to focus intensely, having or being able to think for yourself, as you said, assess like the importance of things, those will be far more valuable than any like single programming language you can learn.
Exactly. And I'd say that probably the number one skill, and this is also very high level, but it makes sense when you start practicing it, is creativity. And what I mean by creativity is applying ideas from disparate fields in novel ways. So what that means is, for example, shipping, which is a very, very old industry from the 1400s. I'm talking about boats.
Yeah.
A lot of shipping is still in pen and paper. A lot of it is paper documents. It's becoming digitized slowly, but they just have never been exposed to a lot of these technologies. So creativity means taking something like ChatGPT and introducing that to a ship captain in a way that you learn about their field, and then you also learn about technology you're applying, and apply it to solve a problem that they never even thought about before. So learning to find out like what are the gaps between one field and another, and then applying that novel like level of creativity there is really how to kind of like shape the world. And that's actually one tremendous weakness of these large language models, is that they're actually not very creative. They're creative in the way that, yeah, they can make art and they can apply different styles and they can mix and match things, but it's not novel or creative in the way that actually solves real problems. And that's where we as humans can really specialize and say, oh, I have knowledge that the models will never have, and I am an expert in the field, or I know someone who's an expert in the field, and they're missing out on this. And just thinking about how to connect those dots, that's a skill that's always worth investing in.
Absolutely. One thing that reminded me is that the shipping example, I think actually Andrew Ng, his company, solved that for some shipping company where they implemented like ML models and were able to drastically cut down the fuel costs purely because they optimized like the routes the ships took. You mentioned the concept of GPU rich, right? do you mean that specifically like a Western society, or are you talking like even individual or company level? Basically, do you think it will be in the future like right now where people are flexing cars or houses? Do you think we like, oh, I have a supercomputer? Like, do you think that will become as part of the upper class, that everybody will have like their own cluster at home? Not everybody. I'm like talking like 1%.
I'm gonna get some props real quick. Hold on. There we go. Got my GPU hat on.
Nice.
I will keep it off. All right. Anyway, I had a GPU poor hat also. Anyway, the way to think about this is that there's kind of like two providers of compute. You can either be doing this on the edge. So on the edge means like you're running it on your laptop or your cell phone, or just like your local devices. And then you could also be running it on the cloud. And the cloud will always have economies of scale in a way that just daily users are not meant to compete with. Our devices are general purpose, whereas cloud centers are general purpose. So thinking about like, and just like kind of for the average folks, the right way to think about like the dichotomy is what kind of like computations are going to be sent to specialists that are going to be outsourced on the cloud versus ones that are going to be run locally. And this is like not just going to be a large language model thing. It's like it's almost an everything thing. So sometimes if you're a video editor, you might want to have a really beefy MacBook that's specialized for compressing and exporting videos and doing edits. On the other hand, if you are you're running on a lousy laptop, you might want to export this to Adobe Cloud and let them do it. I think that by and large, like a lot of hardware manufacturers are creating more powerful GPUs on device. It's not going to be quite as good and quite as big as the GPTs out there, but you're going to be able to run a lot faster computations that can be run offline. You could run them on an airplane or in the middle of the desert if you really wanted to. And those are things that are accessible to the GPU poor. There's some really cool tools I'd recommend checking out if you are GPU poor or even GPU rich and you want to run it locally. One really great one is LM Studio. It's just a really cool chat app that lets you just connect to your GPU or and load in local models and start chatting with these large language models you can get off the web. Another one is Ollama. Ollama kind of creates a server that you can run in the terminal and you can use it for applications. We've seen a lot of AI agents run on Ollama.
Absolutely.
Because it's just an easy way to run things locally.
Yeah, I mean, I've made multiple videos using Ollama running locally. And there's a certain appeal that, running things locally has on people. Even if they're not doing like sensitive work, it's just like, I own the data, nobody's looking at it, it's running on my computer. It's like, why do you think that is?
So I think that one thing that a lot of these big companies have been doing a very poor job at is establishing trust with users. If anything, if we learned anything from the Sam Altman debacle in November of 2023, is that even if the company seems structured upfront, there might be something that's just fundamentally wrong, or there might be some sneaky business going on. So you should always have a system where you can trust but verify. And I think a lot of these closed source model providers, they don't really give you much of a reason to trust because you cannot verify. And local models have like a huge capacity to just unlock a lot of industries, especially healthcare. So for example, a lot of agent developers we know, they're building AI agents to help with healthcare processes, not diagnostics or anything dangerous potentially, but handling paperwork, reading through insurance documentation and things like this. And that's information you don't necessarily want in the cloud because you don't know if OpenAI is training on your phone numbers, right? Or leaking customer health data. So there's a lot of reasons why you want to have that. And in AgentOps, we also focus on this a lot too, which is we try to create a lot of tools for users who don't want to send their data to the cloud and basically make it easier to track and understand and manage exactly what's going on in these agentic systems without having to sell off the data to third-party providers.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's like so much demand, so many different field types of companies where it's just like they would love to use something like OpenAI, but they don't want to share it. And even like I know there's Microsoft Azure, there's like OpenAI Azure, but still it's not as secure as running it locally. Like that's always going to be like better to not even send it over the internet. And as you said, like you never know what's happened. Like sure, OpenAI promises they will not train on API tokens, but like, what if they are using them to like check whether it's, basically there's a lot of other things they could be doing, not just training new models, right? So if you don't want your data to be used in that way, you have to seek another solution. Okay, one thing I want to also mention is that the specialized compute in terms of clusters and supercomputers, that's like a beautiful example is Bitcoin, right? You have these ASIC miners that are optimized to solve proof of work, but are basically useless for everything else. So I think, I probably agree that, we don't have like supercomputers that are built for one thing, maybe like AI inference or AI training or, Bitcoin, whatever. And then general purpose hardware, like, the computers me and you are using will be so we can do anything with it.
Seeing a lot of hardware providers that are specializing exactly chips that are made for ML compute. So for example, really interesting company called Grok. A lot of people have heard of it. GROQ, not to be confused with Elon's Grok.
Yep.
Grok makes these extremely fast chips that are designed especially for calculations that are used by large language models. Another really interesting chip that's coming out is by a company called Extropic. And Extropic, they built these, they're called thermal computers essentially. So they use something called energy-based models. And they actually use the physics of how like temperature regulates itself to sample from probability distributions and make faster, more effective computations than using binary compute. So these kinds of computers might not have general purpose applications in the same way that we run applications on our phones or computers, but they will have machine learning specific applications. So we're going to start seeing a lot of specialized chips, just like the ASICs were in the Web3 world and the crypto world. You're going to see a lot of chips that are emerging just for especially running machine learning and deep learning models.
Earlier, you mentioned that, when there's like economic advancement, it mostly flows to the people who own the assets rather than the people who are like at the bottom of the society, even though historically that trend is not true. In the short term, it certainly is true. For example, we saw it with COVID, like the small restaurants and like, gyms were struggling, but everybody who owned tech stocks was like happy, right? Because it just exploded. So my question is like, this is concept from Balaji, the smart get smarter. Do you believe in this? Do you believe that people who are like on the cutting edge of AI will get even further because, they are using agents, they are able to automate 2 hours of their work and then unlock that with something else. And, they're better at prompting so they can get more out of the LLMs. Do you believe that, the smart will get smarter and like the gap between like who's on the cutting edge and who's like ignoring AI will grow even further?
I think I'm fundamentally optimistic based on what I've seen from economic history. And I do agree that the smart will get smarter, but what everyone fears is like a K-shaped divergence, which is the smart get smart, but the poor, they get worse off because they're losing out in some way. But by and large, if you just look at the history of technological progress, it's always been democratic. It's always arrived at the people who can seek to get the most value from it. And that's actually not the smartest. It's actually the poorest who get the most value out of this stuff on average. So I think we should be optimistic and thinking about when we develop these technologies, we're doing so in a way that will probably benefit everyone. If you're using it in a way that's malicious and will steal things, I think that will definitely just hurt people. But you have to be intentional about that. And what's wonderful just about people, we're capable of a lot of dreadful things, but we work for each other. And that this is like going back to what Adam Smith says, which is we work for ourselves, but in doing so, we make everybody else better off. And
but so many people don't understand
because
this.
we do
like it is obvious, but like so many people believe that when somebody is rich, they're evil. Like, but you have to provide a product or a service that others buy to get the money, right? So like, it sounds obvious to you and me, but there is millions, tens of millions of people who fundamentally do not understand this concept.
It's deeply philosophical, and I think it's pretty contentious too. This idea goes back to kind of the Scottish Enlightenment and thinkers like Adam Smith, who basically say that trade is what makes us richer. And for a very long time, for most of economic history, economists thought that trade between nations would make the nations poorer, and it would be better to be an isolated autarky. But truth of the matter is you have like economists like David Ricardo, and they come along and say, well, actually, through comparative advantage and through making international trade, we make the world on average richer for everyone. And that's the way to think about this technology also, which is it might make sense to hoard everything to ourselves, but by actually engaging with others and sharing this and making just trade and just transactions, this benefits everyone. So I think that you really have to have a dismal view on the world to think that advancements make people worse off. You should always look at the optimistic things about what is improving, even though something disappears. And on average, and just historically speaking, people do just benefit.
Absolutely. So, which you mentioned sharing with everybody, which brings me to the topic of open source. What are your thoughts on open source, and do you think that as AI gets better, we should hope to make it more and more open, or do you think it should become more and more closed?
So I think that by and large, open source just is it enables a lot of like different growth strategies for companies that are trying to accomplish broader goals. So Mistral, for example, they are trying to be open source not because they plan on making money with open source, but because they know that they can upsell larger enterprise that want specialized and larger models. Because basically the open source models are like they're samples. They get you part of the way there, but Mistral has like the internal knowledge that's capable of taking it from 90% to 95 to 100%. I think that what a lot of people think about in terms of open source models is that using knowledge in a way that could potentially be dangerous. This is a lot of the rhetoric that goes around OpenAI, which is if too many people get access to this technology very quickly, it could lead to problematic systems. My prediction is this. In the old world of before AI, we had traditional cybersecurity. So you had red teams, which were the attackers, and you had the blue teams, which were the defenders. And red teams were not always necessarily good people. It was sometimes the North Korean government. They were hackers who were taking down Sony, and they were hackers who were taking down Xbox and all these different networks. And they were especially prevalent in the gaming community, and they just were out there to cause chaos. The challenge, though, is how do you make sure that the attackers don't get too much power? And the way you do that is you invest in the defenders. So I think right now we have a very, very robust cybersecurity industry. So I think I didn't mention this before, but I started off my career working in cybersecurity. I worked for a company called Checkpoint. So Checkpoint was probably the first enterprise-grade firewall. And they've since spawned off like a lot of other products many of them are AI and machine learning based. So I was based on the machine learning research team. We were identifying novel ransomware attacks using machine learning classifiers. So you have to think about, are you investing in the blue team? So you might be investing a lot in the models, but if you think the models are fundamentally dangerous, that becomes a red team. The blue team is saying, how do I make sure that these models don't go out of control? And there's a lot of different methods and methodologies for learning. How do you make sure that something is not going to go out of control? It's about creating controls in your own systems. It's about creating checks. It's about making sure humans are prepared to encounter this kind of stuff. And this is the kind of industry I think that's going to see the most growth, actually, which is, yes, the models are going to become extremely powerful very quickly and very soon. But now it's time to actually say, how do we defend against potential risks? And that's where a lot of industry is growing right now. There's one really interesting company I know of called Redcoat, which basically they try to use AI to infiltrate companies. They do social engineering attempts using basically GPT, and they find users who don't know any better in those companies. And then if they catch them, they have to go through training programs, anti-AI training programs to learn how to detect AI themselves. So these are the kinds of programs that essentially we need to start thinking about, which is these are the tools that the attackers are going to get their hands on. How do we prepare the defenders? And this is a big industry opportunity.
Okay, so do you think like if there's like, let's say 100 times or even 1,000 times more compute on the good side, that we will be good? Because like there's people obviously scared of things like bioweapons, right? If somebody can create a pathogen that can target certain group of people, what if, like, do you think that if we just like massively overcompensate and like do 1,000 times more compute on the cures, on like the proteins and different stuff that could prevent this, do you think that's like that solves the issue of like bad actors having access. If just like same with cybersecurity, it's like way more people are working in the field than in the hacking field. So do you think that would be the case? Just by dedicating way more resources to the good side, that will we can safely open it up to everybody?
I think that this is historically what's been working the most. There will always be attacks and there will always be attackers. So this is like an inevitable constant about how these things go. But the two things we need to invest in are A, the protection, and then B, the remediation. So when I was working in cybersecurity, I spent a lot of time in how preparing companies for A, investing in their cyber posture, but B, when things inevitably do go wrong, how are you prepared to handle this? So a lot of companies, we were dealing with a lot of energy companies, for example, oil, natural gas, and even nuclear. If a hacker takes over your nuclear power plant and there's nothing you can do about it, how do you prepare the world for a scenario where this could possibly go wrong? So it's about having a lot of checks. It's basically knowing and having like a big laundry list of things, saying like, okay, my attack, they got access to the nuclear power plant. Now what? It's about knowing how to do the PR response, right? Like saying, okay, it's all under control. It's about notifying the right people. It's about having a breach coach. It's about having the right insurance documents in place. So it's basically, imagine like AI is kind of like a hurricane, and but it's also like it lets you live on the nice beach in Florida. And Florida is always getting hit by hurricanes. Just because there are hurricanes doesn't mean we don't want to live on the beach. It's about being prepared for when the disaster strikes. Are we going to be ready for it? So a lot of this is just about human controls, honestly, and about having the right insurance policies, about having the right people ready for the disaster mitigation. So I don't think it's a very great answer that people like love, but it's just the truth of the matter is we deal with disasters all the time. And there might be an impending AI disaster, but it's about preparing for it in the way that we do traditionally with cybersecurity and regular insurance and regular disasters.
So it sounds like philosophically you're leaning more towards open source everything.
I think that open source everything makes it easier for the defenders. It might make it easier for the attackers, but the defenders need their ammunition. If we don't give them the resources they need, it's going to be way harder.
I agree. Okay, so another question from one of the community members. How good do you think GPT-5 will be? And especially regarding to AI agents.
So there were some original rumors that GPT-5 was going to come out in June 2023. And that has since been debunked because it is almost the end of June right now. We're about midway through. I might be wrong. You can edit this maybe a month later. We'll see. GPT-5, I think what we imagine it's going to have is a lot more complex multimodal capacities. This is kind of like an interesting hint that OpenAI has spoken about is there's kind of two classes of models that OpenAI releases. They have the base numbers, so you can think of GPT-3 as a base and GPT-4 as a base. And then you have the semi-increments, so 3.5, and then you have 4.5. The base model, so GPT-3 is like its own class, and 3.5 is actually a lot more closer to 4 than 4.5. So 3.5 is like 4 beta, and then 4.5 is like 5 beta. So you can think of it like this, like everything that will happen in GPT-5 is already being hinted at in GPT 4.5. So these are like kind of like, this is the kind of projection you should be looking at, like what is the baseline here? And this is like basically an extension of the baseline.
So longer context windows, faster inference, multimodality, all of the things that we've seen from GPT-4o.
So we see 128K context window in 4.5. This is essentially like kind of a hint. We're probably going to see much longer context windows. We also see GPT-4 vision, right? So that vision is going to be a huge component, and the Omni, which is the voice, will also probably be a component of that. So definitely multimodality and very, very large context windows. And if you look at the benchmarks, it's probably going to be much, much higher performance on standard benchmarks.
Yeah. Okay, so a lot of people don't like the term benchmarks because it's like, especially the people who are not working at the labs, it's almost like, oh, amazing, it's like better at the MMLU or whatever, but like, what does it that do for me, right? And especially with a lot of the AI product demos focusing heavily on the demo and then the product kind of under delivers. So that leads me to the question, like in terms of real use cases, how are you personally using agents that are actually like helping you in your personal life or business?
So I build a lot of agents just internally to solve some problems I have. So for example, I was hosting a party at my apartment, and I wanted to see who the people were and basically just like do some research on them because a lot of people who were invited, I didn't really know who they were. So I built an agent that would actually just go to their social media profiles and gather some high-level information about them. A lot of people didn't have their full names on the invite, so I was able to find their Instagram or their Twitters and then understand, oh, that's how I know this person because they're connected to so-and-so. So very simple things like this can help my life a lot. I use a lot of coding agents. So I use a lot of, I use V0 from Vercel to write a lot of React components. I also use a lot of things in Cursor to just like write out code snippets for me. One agent that we use all the time internally at AgentOps is we actually have a competitor. So what you can do is you can give it a website and it'll scrape all the information from the website and then create a summarized table of what that information is and then save that table to our CRM. And then that way we have kind of like an up-to-date list of what's going on. It also checks the CRM to make sure that it's not a duplicate entry, or if it's a duplicate entry, it updates the table. So it's like a pretty smart way of just like keeping up to date on things.
Wait, didn't Dharmesh from HubSpot build something similar? Because I saw he launched like
I'm sure he did.
He has the domain, I think he owns the domain name agent.ai. And I think the first agent they launched was exactly that, like company research agent.
The wonderful part about this is that it didn't take me very long to build at all. It took me like less than a day. I just kind of stitched together some code and it was basically smart enough to navigate through itself. So I think the kind of the advantage you have from these the agent.ai's and the HubSpots and these kind of developers in the world is they make the distribution very easily. Our distribution was actually quite hard because this is running on a local server that we were running in our cloud. And it's like a Slack bot connect. So I actually had to do a lot of the wiring. The accessibility bit is where the agents really have their time to shine. So imagine being able to access an agent in WhatsApp or an agent in Discord or an agent in your iMessage or any of your other apps. That's where the huge advantage is going to be conferred to. Technology obviously needs to be good, but distribution is going to be key.
Yeah, I mean, this is where big tech companies have just like an insane advantage, right? Because like if you can ship a update to 2 billion people, it's like, how is a startup going to compete with that?
I think that the huge companies, they have the distribution and they're probably going to be your best distribution partners for a lot of reasons. So I'll give you an example. So we actually launched our own GPT-4 plugin called Chat OCR. And this was back when GPT had a plugin store, and now it's a GPT store.
Yeah.
We were one of the first 100 plugins to ever launch. And we were the only one that could read PDFs that had images in them. And because we had this natural distribution mechanism, we were able to make a lot of money. And we had over 40,000 users use our plugin at the time when it launched. So thinking about it, like, how do you make sure that like you're winning in this distribution war and you're not going to get eaten by the competitors? It's honestly hard because the competitors usually have an incentive to eat away at their best distributors. So for example, Zendesk, there were a lot of AI customer experience and customer support plugins that came to Zendesk. And then Zendesk just made their own. So you might have to fight in different battles. Otherwise, you might just get eaten alive by them.
Okay, so can you paint the future for AI agents? Like paint the picture for people who don't see it. Like, you know, where will we be in a year, in 2 years? Obviously, ignore like the timeline predictions, but like just the promise of AI agents. Like, what are you excited about? How it will look like? You know, all of us having teams of agents working for us. And then the second part is, why aren't we there yet?
AI agents are the next major paradigm shift in computing. And the way to think about it is right now we have two modalities. We have APIs and we have developers. So right now you have developers and they request information from APIs. And that's basically the flow of things. But now you have this new modality, which is agents. And you can think about it like agents requesting data from APIs and developers requesting data from agents. and then agents requesting data from agents, and agents requesting data from developers, and so on and so forth. And this whole new modality compute just like makes it so that we can do so many more operations in the world that are going to be fully autonomous, and you're going to be able to like create data sinks and data sources that had never existed before because the agents be able to figure them out for themselves. You're going to be able to create brand new programs. The agents are capable of making their own programs, which is the magic of it, and solving their own issues. So you can basically just say, I need you to go to this website and fetch data for me. And it's going to understand how to do that problem and do it all on its own. So you're not going to need a developer for that anymore. And you can give it any API, and it's going to be able to basically curate information from the API in a way that's never been done before. So really think about anything that a human can do. Basically expect an agent can be able to do that if it's on the web. And soon, once you give it the ability to actuate with other things, like making phone calls or sending emails or instructing humans to do things, that's when it becomes very, very powerful, to the point where you might be working a job, a very simple job, where you're being managed by an agent instead of a human telling you to do things. And that's super interesting, super powerful.
Yeah, we'll see how people react to that, because there's still a lot of like negative limiting beliefs around that aspect. But yeah, I mean, it is going to happen. It's inevitable. As you said, don't bet against AI.
A lot of people don't even realize this now, but you're probably being instructed by an agent. So a really classic example is we know this one agent developer, and they manage over 200 Airbnb properties. And the way they do it is they use it with AI agents. And so what happens is if a user has a request or a complaint, or they say, oh, I'm locked out, I need the Wi-Fi password, can you send me some more water? The agent manages all of the requests. And then the agent says, oh, there's a cleaning request. I'm going to make a phone call to the cleaner. And then it uses an agentic voice to send a WhatsApp message or make the phone call. And then the cleaner comes over. And it's all orchestrated and managed through this agentic system. And none of the users realize that they're actually speaking to a non-human, because they even make it seem as if like the time delay between when they send the message and when they get it back, they make sure that it seems long enough that a human can be writing it. So it's super powerful. And a lot of people are dealing with systems right now and don't even know about it.
Yeah, I think it will happen, the switch, where in the future, because right now most people would be kind of mad if they found out, they would want to talk to a human. But in the future, it's going to be flipped. It's like the agent will be more capable, more competent than the human. It's like, why am I talking to a human? Like, let the agent solve it.
We're already seeing this now. So there's a company called Klarna. Klarna is a Swedish buy now, pay later company. And they are saving $40 million a year by switching their customer support system to agents. Not only that, the users who do use the agents have higher customer satisfaction ratings than with their previous humans. So I think a lot of people are going to prefer the agents, actually.
Yeah, I mean, they prefer the agents in terms of when they don't know it. I mean, obviously, I agree in the future it will change. But right now, it's like, if you polled most of the people, and it's like, do you want to talk to a human? Do you want to talk to an agent or AI? They'll choose the human, right? Even though, based on all the data, all the customer satisfaction surveys, the agents performed much better for Klarna.
I think that we might have an agent named human coming out, and then people will, if they don't know any better, I mean, it might be a better way to do it. But I think the biggest challenge actually with customer support is that the reason we ask for humans is because humans aren't scripted in the same way. Humans can actually use tools, and they can make exceptions, and they can answer questions that a lot of these diagram-based workflow mechanisms cannot. Once we give the AI agents capabilities to access these kinds of workflows, that's when they become very powerful, and that's when we actually start to like them a lot more.
Yeah, because that's like the fear, when, for example, you take something like a RoboCop, right? Like a robotic police officer, right? There is situations in which he should make exceptions, right? But if it's like purely, if-then statements, or even current LLMs, it would just be following the rules, and it would be like in situations where morality or ethics would cause the human officer to make an exception, a robotic humanoid robot would probably, not make the exception, and then that would obviously make people mad. Okay, so let's wrap up with a question that is related to agent ops. So what would be your dream investor / advisor?
It's a hard question. Our dream investors, well, first of all, we have dream investors already, but it's those who really understand that everything's about to be shaken up by the agentic workflow. Um, a lot of people don't really seem to think that there will be any winners in the space. They think the only winners are going to be the compute providers. But the truth of the matter is that the way that these agents are entering our everyday lives, it's hard to understand that from a high level view. It's when you get into the granular use cases that you actually see, oh, these people are making a killing with agents. So I think it's people who really just understand the future and where it's going, and that a lot of things are going to become autonomous going forward. And it's not just going to be co-pilots. It's going to be really, really fully autonomous stuff. So anyone who really kind of understands and believes in that mission, they're just a dream advisor and kind of investor for us. But in particular, it's people who have like alpha and understanding of like niche use cases that could be solved by this. We're looking for people who are creative. Like I think the biggest value add you can have is just understanding fields very, very well, and fields that people in Silicon Valley have never heard about before. So shipping is a great example. Like people who see the opportunity and also see the gap that it could be delivering on. So two things, like believing in the future, but also creative enough to see the applications where it could be applied for.
Okay, so I'm gonna shift the question a bit. Like, if you had to choose one person who you look up to the most and who you admire, who would that be?
Oh, okay. So there's a famous data scientist who I'm just a huge fan of, and I think he just captures everything I fundamentally believe in like thinking about the field. His name's Jeremy Howard. He's one of the kind of like the biggest names in data science, also has a philosophy background, and his approach towards thinking about problems from a very, very deeply scientific point of view is such a refreshing way of viewing things. And he's also started some incredible companies in the past. And I think that like he's also starting to think very, very deeply about how to measure and think about AI systems in general. He would be probably one of the best thought leaders possible in this space.
So maybe he'll see this and invest into Agent Ops or reach out to you.
Jeremy, you're the best. Even if you don't say yes, you're still the best. So.
All right, Alex, I want to thank you for taking the time. I think it was an amazing discussion, and I think what you're doing with Agent Ops is super smart. You're taking the strategy of selling the picks and shovels instead of doing one framework. You're betting on all of them. You're betting on the field, which I think is the right strategy. So again, thanks for taking the time. I enjoyed the conversation.
We love the idea of like benchmarking the market instead of benchmarking the approach. So anyone who's looking to develop AI agents or agentic systems, we're happy to chat. We have a super open Discord. We ask a lot of interesting questions. We have a lot of interesting discussions. If you need help chatting or building your own agent, feel free to reach out to me. I'm super available on Twitter and Discord, and happy to chat. David, this has been awesome.
Thank you. All of those links will be in the description, by the way. So if you want to check out Agent Ops or the Discord or their GitHub or follow Alex on Twitter, it'll be linked below the video. So again, thank you for watching and have a great day.